Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's live stream. We have a special guest later on, a special guest from the United States of America, who is going to be an excellent guest. We're going to have a fascinating discussion over a range of issues, which will have some interesting perspectives from over the water. As usual, I'll start with just a few little things coming up for the Scottish Family Party. Just to mention our conference, 18th of November. Keep that date in your diary. You'll be able to book tickets soon. Later on this week, we've got a big event outside the Scottish Parliament. That's on Thursday this week, 12:30 p.m. Thursday, 12:30. We are joining in a demonstration against the Scottish Government's new transgender guidance for schools. I'm sure most of you are up to speed on that, but the problem is that basically it promotes the ideology of transgenderism to children to start off with. Then if a child of any age says, oh, actually, I think I might be a boy or a girl or whatever, then the school is instructed to just accept that, to ask them if they'd like to change name, if they'd like to be treated as that boy or a girl within school. And all this can go ahead without the parents being informed. The guidance from the SNP government is quite clear. It said only tell the parents if the child wants the parents to know. Otherwise, the school is to keep it secret. Now, this is just totally outrageous. So we're making our feelings known, making our voice heard outside the Parliament, 12:30 on Thursday. It would be great to see you there. We've got various placards at the ready. I don't know if you'll be able to see this, actually. Let's see. Oh, there we are. Things like that. So if you fancy holding a placard like that outside the Parliament on Thursday, then it'd be great to see you. After then, we'll go and get a coffee or lunch somewhere. Later on the evening, we're meeting for a meal at 6 o'clock. You see the details on our social media. And then there's an Edinburgh branch meeting that evening as well. Again, details are on social media. So it'd be great to see you at any or all of those events. If you're traveling some distance, maybe you could stay for the meeting in the evening as well. Now, it's a busy week this week. Tomorrow night, there's a meeting in Glasgow, family party meeting in Glasgow. That's in the Premier Inn at Charing Cross at 7:30. I will be talking about this transgender guidance in schools, and there'll be other things on the agenda as well. So that's Glasgow tomorrow evening, 7:30 again. See our social media for the details. And then on Friday this week, there is a Scottish Family Party meeting in Peterhead. Well, near to Peterhead. It's out in the country at someone's house. Again, you can see details on social media that they're going to be interviewing someone who just recently joined the party in that area. And next week, just advance notice, there is a meeting in Ayr. On Wednesday night, again, I'll be speaking about the transgender guidance for schools. So lots of meetings coming up. It would be great to see you at any of them. I've mentioned the ones in the next week or so. If you look at the whole list, there's a whole lot more coming up. So it'd be great to see you at those meetings and at the demonstration. Next week on the live stream, we have someone from the School Gate campaign. That's a group in England that have been trying to make parents aware of the nature of sex education in England by handing out leaflets, etc., at school gates, as the name suggests. So they'll be speaking to one of us next week. I'm sure that will be very interesting. Right, but on to this evening's guest. This evening's guest is Terry Schilling, who is from the American Principles Project, which is a campaigning group, a think tank. We'll see how it describes it in a minute. In America, I've been looking at their website. They've been on Fox News, CNN, the Tucker Carlson show. Also, there's a really strong voice in American society and American politics, promoting the centrality of the family and also arguing for a lot of the other issues that we're concerned with as the Scottish Family Party. So we've got lots of topics we're going to try and talk about. Do join in the comments. In fact, I've remembered this week. I'll get the comments there showing. Do put comments. We'll try to respond to those. But welcome to Terry. Terry, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Richard.
Now, where are you exactly in the States?
I'm in Northern Virginia, which is just outside of Washington, D.C., our nation's capital.
Okay. Now, just tell us a bit about yourself and the American Principles Project before we get our teeth into some of the issues we're going to discuss.
Yeah, no problem. Well, so I just personally, I'm the eldest of 10 kids. My dad and I started a family pizza restaurant right in the Midwest, right in the middle of the country, about 26 years ago. And so family is very important to me. Myself, I've been married for 12 years, and my wife and I have 5 wonderful children, and I hope to have 4 or 5 more as long as God blesses me. But we started the American Principles Project to fill a very specific gap when it comes to family policy. There are a lot of good organizations in America who are focused on helping the family. There's Focus on the Family, for example, which is the ministry that helps counsel families to work through their problems. There's the Family Research Council that does a lot of good public policy work, but there was no one filling the political gap for families. And what I mean by that is the legislative advocacy front and the campaigns and election front. So we're basically building what I call the NRA for families. So the NRA in America, they organize gun owners in politics to protect the Second Amendment. What American Principles Project is doing is we're organizing families in politics to protect the family. So we get involved in all different types of fights. We want to make it easier to get married, have babies, and protect our kids, especially when it comes to the broader culture and our schools. So we fight against critical race theory and the 1619 Project, which is really nefarious. We fight against transgender ideology. We're a pro-life organization. Anything that's harming kids or their innocence. We fight against pornography online. We want to protect kids from all of that. Anything that's touching the family or keeping the birth rates low, we want to address that because families really are the bedrock of any stable society. And when people start prioritizing their jobs or their houses or their material goods over their families, nations don't really last very much longer than that. So we want to get America to reprioritize the family, put it right at the heart and center of all of our public policy in this country. And that's why we're here. That's why we exist. So I'm really looking forward to the conversations we're going to have.
Music to our ears, music to our ears. I mean, what you were saying there is entirely on our wavelength. We also saw a gap in the market, if you like, or a whole range of opinions related to family and related moral issues. The case wasn't being made in the political arena. It's been made by, I mean, in Scotland, there are campaigning groups, but within the actual political arena, I mean, these views are completely absent. I think the big difference in Scotland is we've got an electoral system where a small party is a bit more proportional representation. So a small party can get some representation. Whereas in America, it's the battle between the big two. So it's influencing the policies of those. But lots of what you said there, with all of what you said there, I say resonates entirely with what we're about. So if this was a job interview, you'd have got the job with the Scottish family.
That's great.
That's for sure. Well, let's start with the central issue, marriage and family. What sort of policy avenues do you look at there? Are there any specific steps that you'd be urging the government or the parties' policies to adopt in these areas?
Yeah, so there's a couple things in America that make it really difficult to start a family. Most kids in high school are told that in order to get a good paying job, they have to go to college. And so what ends up happening is these poor little kids, when they're 18, they sign all this paperwork and they end up locking themselves down with tens of thousands and sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of student loan debt. And then they end up marrying someone with just as much student loan debt. So these kids are graduating college, and some of them aren't even graduating, but they're getting done with college with a mortgage worth of student loan debt. And it's absolutely unhealthy. So what we're doing is we're encouraging the government to give economic subsidies to families and treat families. One of the plans that we have that we're proposing is to treat families more like corporations when it comes to the tax code. So to put it simply, I know that a lot of your viewers aren't going to be familiar with the United States tax code. In the United States, corporations pay taxes on their net income. So after all their expenses, they only pay taxes on their profits. While families and individuals, we pay taxes on our gross income or our gross adjusted income. So you get some write-offs, but as a family, I have to pay to educate my kids. I have to pay to clothe them. I have to pay to shelter them and transport them. But I don't get to write any of that off of my taxes at the end of the year. But if I'm a corporation and I'm feeding my employees, if I'm paying for their uniforms, if I'm paying to train them or educate them, I get to write all of that off. So we want to change the U.S. tax code to prioritize families and give them more incentives. We support things like expanding the child tax credit, so eliminating the federal tax burden of families. One thing that we're toying around with is addressing Social Security and our safety net system to incentivize people to have more children, where they get a deduction of their Social Security and their payroll taxes the more kids that they have. So we're on the marriage and family front, for encouraging more marriages and having more children. We're trying to increase the economic incentives for families to form, and to eliminate all of the economic hurdles that families have to get through just to have children today.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'll pick up on a couple of things with that. You said about the college students finishing their courses with a lot of debt. It's a similar situation in Britain. In Scotland, tuition is free, but still people have student loans for their living expenses, so they've still got a lot of debt. Now, it's quite understandable that debt will discourage young couples from having children, or might make them think they need to delay having children. I mean, is there evidence of that? Has research been done, or is it one of those things that the sort of sociological establishment doesn't want to know about it? Have you seen hard evidence?
There isn't that much evidence on why people aren't having children anymore, and families or getting married. But what we do know is that by forcing, in America, in the 1950s and 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, and probably all the way up until the 2000s, most people would get married right out of high school. They would start their families. Family was the number one most important thing. And then you'd find a job to help support that family. Over the course of the last 50, 60 years, Americans have totally turned that on its head. You now want to get a good paying job or a college degree before you even have a family. And what ends up happening is there's a psychological effect to where you value your job, you value your career, you value your college degree more than you value the children that you could be creating at this standpoint, all right, at this point in your life. So there hasn't been a lot. And in fact, most people that, when you ask them why they aren't having children, they will tell you that it's because they have a pessimism in the future of the country. So there have been a few baby booms in American history. Most notably, the biggest baby boom was right after World War II and the Great Depression. And some sociologists would suggest that the reason for that baby boom is not because of any economic incentive, but because Americans at that point had a lot of optimism in the future. They had just won World War II. They had gotten out of the Depression. There was an optimism that the future was going to be very good and very bright for any future generations. And but at the end of the day, it was still a lot easier to start a family. Back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, and 80s, and 90s, I feel like a broken record. You could support a family off of one income. Today in America, you can't do that. You have to have both parents working. And what ends up happening is when both parents are working and outside of the home, there's no one raising the children. And so what ends up happening is children are being raised by computer screens and TV screens and their handheld devices. And it's really toxic. It's creating really bad future citizens and people that really lack a lot of values and morals and really any sort of notion of right and wrong. And it's causing a lot of problems. So it's not necessarily proven that this is economic, but it's definitely a hurdle that we need to cross.
Yeah. I mean, the Scottish government's attitude to parents and childcare, they start from the assumption that every family would dearly love to be able to get rid of their children and have someone else look after them. That's what all families want. So if you want family-friendly policy, all they think about is, we'll take people's kids off them so they can go and do something else. Because obviously everyone would rather be doing something else apart from bringing up their own kids. And that's the assumption. Now, I understand in America, the tax allowance is transferable, isn't it? So families are taxed as a family unit rather than as two individuals. Is that correct?
Well, there are several different filings that you can do. You can do as head of household, or married filing separately, or married filing jointly. Most families choose to do married filing jointly together, so where they're both of their incomes are combined. And that's just how it works here. But I will say
there's no such thing with that in Britain. There's no such thing.
Oh,
that was abolished decades ago. So that's a major penalty against the single earner family. So if a family wants, for example, to have a working dad and a full-time mum, that's very difficult because dad gets hammered for tax and the mum can't transfer the tax allowance, which is incredibly unfair. That's one of our major campaigning points on this issue. So at least you haven't got that problem. Now, I understand in France, you probably know this, in France, you get an extra half a tax allowance per dependent child in the home. And the fertility rate in France is, I think it's been dipping a bit recently, but generally has been a lot healthier than in other countries. And I think that policy might well be a part of it. I mean, fertility rate in Scotland is 1.37. I mean, in America, what do you want? It's a lot higher than that, isn't it? It's below replacement, but
it's a little bit higher than that. We're sitting at 1.78 children per woman. So it's a little bit higher, but it's still no passing grade, that's for sure.
Yeah. I don't know. Have you read the book? What's it called? What to Expect When No One's Expecting?
Yes, I have. It's one of my favorite books, and it's been the inspiration for a lot of the work we do here.
Yeah, it's a great book. I recommend it to anyone. I can't remember the author. What to Expect When No One's Expecting. And it's about the impending population decline, the fact that fertility rates are declining all over the world, even in countries you traditionally think have a very high fertility rate, that it's generally going down. And it was saying that when governments have policies to try and reduce fertility rates, they tend to work. But when they have policies to try and increase them, well, that seems to be a really tough call. That seems to be a really long-term project.
There's a lot of inertia that goes with population growth and decline. And even when they try to stop the population growth, it still takes a few decades to slow it down. Like, for example, the problem is that you get to a point when you have a baby boom, for example, right? You have a family that ends up having 4 or 5 children. Well, all of those children then go on to have children. They might have less, but you still have a lot more children in your country, and it increases the average. The problem with population decline is that once women start putting off childbearing, women only have a short period of time in which they can even have children. And it usually starts to decline when they turn 35 or 36. After that point, it's very difficult for them to have children. So what's the problem that America faces is that we are aging as a country, and our women are getting older. They're not having children in their youth like they used to. And it's a real problem for a lot of reasons. Women are missing out on having kids. I think we forget that children are a blessing. They are amazing. They are funny. They're entertaining, and they are the future of a nation. And when you stop having children and you put that off to have your career, you're prioritizing very short-term gains in order to have long-term losses. And it's a total disaster. And Americans, the Soviet Union, there was a reporter from the New York Times who embedded himself behind enemy lines in the Soviet Union to talk to Soviet women about how much different their lives were than American women. And he asked some of the Soviet women, in America, mothers don't have to work. Fathers are able to provide for their families on one income. And the mothers were flabbergasted. At this time, this is a nation that doesn't even allow mothers to raise their own children, or grandmothers, or any extended family. Children were forced to be in daycare centers all day and then go right into school. So the Soviet women were puzzled by this, and they came up with things like, don't American women want to help out their country? Don't they want to help out their economy? Don't they want to make money? Don't they want to do something better and bigger than having children? It's such a pessimistic mindset, and Americans freely chose that. That mindset was really forced on those Soviet women. And the really weird thing about American women is that they chose that. And we all know that, raising children is very, very difficult, but it's very, very rewarding. You don't get very many opportunities to change the world as much as you do when you're a mother. Right? I feel so bad for a lot of these women who go get their bachelor's degree, then go get their master's degree, and they put off having children so that they can write press releases for members of Congress or for Google or for Amazon. They help rich white people make more money instead of raising their own children. It's absolutely crazy. And I'm not trying to denigrate anyone. People have their own freedom to make their own choices in their lives, but they're choosing the wrong thing. right? Like it's a really good thing to raise children. It's a really important job to be a mother. Being a mother is probably the most important job in the entire world. And you're not going to change the world by writing press releases for Google in the same way that you are when you're a mother and creating new human life that's going to go on to change the world in infinite and immeasurable ways.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the overwhelming message in Scottish education is very much a feminist line that, if you're really, as a girl, if you're really going to fulfill your potential, you've got to be a CEO or a lawyer or a member of the Scottish Parliament or a fighter pilot or whatever. It's like anything that's really showing them what you can do. Whereas you assume, like, bringing up kids somehow by implication, that's not fulfilling your potential. And it's just a whole generation after generation have been brought up with this way of thinking. But of course, they're declaring war on human nature.
That's exactly right.
I think that generally in a lot of women and girls, as they're growing up, they realize that is actually what they would prefer to do on balance. They would rather devote more time to family life than their career or whatever. And then that comes out in the choices that they make. Then when they make those choices, the government then looks at them and says, oh, this must be the result of sexism and discrimination. We need some policies to stop them doing this, to make them make exactly the same choices as men. It's as though feminism idolizes men. It thinks
that's exactly right.
The choices men make, that's good. So what we need to do is make women the same as men. Then we've really got somewhere. I mean,
Richard, I had this conversation with my mother, who's the mother of 10 children. I'm her eldest, and she said it better than I could say it, which is that these young women have it absolutely backwards. She had just figured out that she was going through that time in her life where she couldn't have children anymore. She said, I was a little bit depressed, and then I realized that I can now do anything. I can go get my college degree. I can start that coffee shop that I've always wanted to start. I can start a business. I can go get a job and be a CEO. And if you think about it, being a mother and the head of a household where you're running things every day, you're kind of like a CEO. I mean, women are actually really good bosses and they're really good leaders in a lot of ways. And, being the head of a household of 10 kids, my mom could run any Fortune 500 company. She's got that experience. She's got that leadership experience, and people listen to her, and she's developed those skills. But, the women that choose to do their careers first, they're running out of time. There's going to be a point in which they can't have children anymore, but they can always go get their college degree. So we've just got to, reinforce with women today. It's so good to be a mom. It's so healthy. It's such a rewarding job, and it's so important. It's more important than being the CEO at 24 years old. It's so much more important. And there's going to be a point where you can't have any more children, but you can still get a college degree at any point in your life.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I understand that when couples are married, they're more likely to have children and have more children. I think that's a universal truth. So promoting marriage, that's one of our big priorities of the Scottish Family Party, is trying to promote marriage. How do you think that can be done? Through the political system or through culture or what?
I think it's a both and. I think it's a both and, not an either or. I think that our public policy needs to prioritize marriage. And there's a lot so in America, we have a federalist system in which there's a weaker federal government, or supposed to be weaker federal government, and the states can have a little bit of leeway too. I think we need to start experimenting in the states. In the various states that we have 50 states, and they need to start passing different policies that attract married people and encourage people to get married. And they can do that in a lot of ways by giving incentives with state income taxes or local property taxes. But there's a lot of different levers that we can do. I think one of the big things that we have to do in America anyway is get rid of all of the incentives for childless and marriageless homes. Right. So if you're a mom and on public assistance, you get more money if there's no father in the picture. That is insane. You're actually subsidizing fatherlessness and encouraging fathers to be out of the home. And it's so important. We all know that the social science on this is all very, very boring because of how much there is and how predictable it is. We all know that the married families with children that go to church on Sunday do the absolute best in all different types of socioeconomic platforms, whether it's mental health or crime or or education status. And we all know who does the worst, and it's the children raised in unmarried homes that don't go to church on Sunday. It's all very predictable, and so that's one of the big hurdles is we have to get rid of every federal incentive that encourages fathers to get out of the picture.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the picture in Scottish politics is they always want to be picking up the pieces. They know there's some people struggling, there's some poverty, etc. So they want to pick up the pieces, but they will not look at trying to influence people's decisions that lead to different family structures, that lead to these problems that where they're trying to pick up the pieces. But it's like taboo, because people just assume that if you start saying we think children are best brought up by their mum and dad, they assume you're saying all sorts of horrible things about all sorts of other people, and they're going to be very offended. And so they just won't touch it. It is totally taboo. They will not go there. And so all the attention is always on picking up the pieces. So we find we're often saying, okay, your efforts to pick up the pieces, they're all very noble. Okay, you've got a limited amount of money to spend, but okay, you're trying your best to help these people. But how about trying to avoid people being in these situations in the first place? And that element is just not there. I mean, it's chronic short-termism. I mean, is that a similar picture in American politics?
No, that's exactly right. Anytime you start talking about encouraging married families with children or incentivizing it, everyone comes out of the woodwork, every different special interest group. It doesn't matter if it's the unmarried households or the LGBT movement, everyone takes it as an attack. And really what we have to do is we have to stop letting the exceptions govern the rule. The rule is that children are born to a mother and a father. Every child that it comes into this world has a mom and a father that helped create them. It's just the truth. It doesn't matter if you're LGBT and you hired a surrogate, that child has a mother and it has a father that created it. And that child needs that mother and father, ideally, and there are always exceptions to that rule, but that child needs that mother and father active and engaged in their life. The best situation, it's not controversial, it's not incorrect, it's a time-old tale, which is that the best situation for a kid is to be with their biological mother and father, living in a happy home where there's lots of love. That is the ideal situation. That's how you get strong societies. That's how you get a bright future for the country. And we're letting these exceptions determine what the rules are. And we just need to stop. We need to ignore them. We need to march on and start encouraging. Look, everyone has a free choice. You don't have to choose one way or the other, but we have to acknowledge the facts and we have to acknowledge the data and the science. And the data and the science show that children do best with a married mother and father that love them and each other unconditionally. That's simple.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, shall we move on to another topic? That was fascinating. We've got various other ones. How about the pro-life issue in America? Well, what's the state of play there? Is it encouraging at the moment? Is there progress?
It's very confusing at the moment, and it's very high stakes. So for those of your viewers that aren't familiar, in America, prior to 1973, the Supreme Court, in 1973, the Supreme Court had an infamous ruling known as Roe versus Wade. And in that ruling, it struck down every single abortion restriction in the country post-viability or pre-viability. It was a disastrous decision. After that, we saw over 60 million babies be aborted and killed in the womb, not out of rape and incest, but simply out of birth control. And it's been an unmitigated disaster. And we've tried to overturn Roe v. Wade several times in the past, and each time we've failed. Now, we're at a point in American history where we have a 6-3, or what appears to be a 6-3 majority on the United States Supreme Court. And the court has decided to hear a case out of Mississippi where there's a law that was passed. It's a ban at 15 weeks. So basically, it's a ban at when the unborn child can feel pain. And the Supreme Court is going to consider whether or not all pre-viability bans are constitutional or unconstitutional. And it's no one knows how the Supreme Court is going to decide. There have been very concerning rulings and decisions that have come out of this current Supreme Court with judges that were expected to be staunch conservatives, such as Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett. So we will see in due time. They're doing the hearings in November on this case, and we're going to find out next June whether or not the Supreme Court has upheld the Mississippi ban on abortion as constitutional or not. If they hold it up as constitutional, what you will see is both the red states and the blue states working very fast to advance the ball in each direction. So you'll see the blue states run by Democrats working to liberalize and eliminate any abortion restrictions that they have on the states. And then you'll also see the the red states moving to restrict abortion as fast as they can. This is going to be an epic showdown. It's the Super Bowl for the pro-life issue. And, if the Supreme Court rules that this abortion restriction is unconstitutional, I don't know what's going to happen. What I can tell you is that the movement will be moving much more in the direction of politics instead of relying on the courts to save us. So we're going to have to get a president elected who decides to pass laws that actually restrict abortion at the federal level and challenge the courts directly. We have to stop relying on the courts. Abraham Lincoln, when he ended slavery, he didn't rely on the courts to overturn slavery laws. He had to do it himself. They had to pass constitutional amendments, and it'll be a very clarifying moment. My biggest nightmare, though, is if the Supreme Court rules that these abortion bans are unconstitutional. I'm very worried that there could be a deflation of the pro-life movement. It's been almost 50 years since the Roe v. Wade decision, and we've been trying like crazy all different types of methods, and we've failed every time. And so my big nightmare is if they don't overturn it, where the movement goes from there. It's either going to get angry and louder, or it's going to go away, which will be a very bad thing.
Yeah. I was really interested in what you said there about people can't rely on the courts. I think that's a really important point. I think that's very relevant here as well, because there have been some legal victories in Scotland where the government or councils have sort of overreached and they've done some things, particularly restricting religious freedom, and they've come a cropper in the court. It's been knocked back in the court. The government's tried to overreach into family life in one particular way, and it was knocked back to some extent in the court. So I feel there's a danger that people feel that the courts can be our savior. But ultimately, the politicians are in charge. They will push things the way they want. If the law is stopping them, they'll change the law in the longer term. So the law is, it might slow things down. You might have tactical victories, but on a strategic level, I completely agree. But it needs to be political. But what's your opinion on public opinion? I mean, is it shifting in a pro-life direction, or is it fairly static, or?
So it's a little bit complicated. You really have to dig into the numbers. If you ask Americans if they are pro-life or pro-choice, it's going to be, depending on the day, it's going to be a 50-50 proposition. But if you ask Americans, do you support ban abortion after the second trimester or during the second trimester, you're going to see it go from a 50-50 proposition to an 80-20 proposition. And that's not an exaggeration. Right. Most Americans support abortion in cases of rape, incest, and life of the mother, and they don't really support outside of that. And when they do support outside of that, it has to be within the first trimester, very early on in the pregnancy. So, America is good. America is a good nation, and America knows that babies are good and they shouldn't be harmed. And the common talking point in America when you talk to a pro-choice person is always, well, I'm not pro-abortion. I don't support abortion. I would never get an abortion. My daughter would never get an abortion, but I just have a hard time telling someone else what to do with their bodies. It's a cop-out, right? It's more out of being polite or not wanting conflict and not wanting to boss other people around. America is an interesting nation because we are founded on self-government and mostly just, you leave me alone, I'll leave you alone. But that's all changing very quickly, especially in light of the COVID-19 catastrophe that is just wreaking havoc on all of our civil liberties over here. The public polling on pro-life versus pro-choice, I would definitely say that when push comes to shove, America is a pro-life nation. Our leaders have failed us, especially the courts. One thing I'll add about the courts and why we can never trust them to save us is that the courts are an elite institution. And elites over the past several years have become very, very bad and run. And throughout history, elites have become run. Right? The elites are always getting corrupted. The founding fathers of America knew that, and they ensured a lot of protections and checks and balances against that. But you can never depend on the courts because it is a reflection of the elite and what I would say the ruling class of America and the rest of the world. And so you'll never be able to depend on them to reflect the will of the American people.
Yeah, that's interesting. In terms of public opinion in Scotland, if people had just asked, basically, pro-abortion, anti-abortion, I mean, the pro-life comes out at about 10 or 15%. So a long, long way from the situation there. If the question's asked differently, if the question's asked about later abortions or whatever, you can get ones where you get a majority of people saying that they would prefer a lower time limit or whatever. But
Richard, I want to point out something because I've looked into this before. We did an autopsy report on the 2012 election in which we argued that politics is not downstream from culture. We argued that politics is actually, it's part of culture and it can be influenced by culture, but politics and law can actually change the culture. And we compared the abortion opinions in America to the opinions on abortion legalization in Great Britain. And what we found is very similar to what you just mentioned, which is a very low support for banning abortion. And the real thing is that the political fight, at least from our perspective over here, you might be able to enlighten me. There's no real political fight to restrict abortion and protect the unborn in Great Britain, or at least hasn't been since they legalized it, or it might be just starting up over the last decade or so. But in America, there's been a sustained fight for the unborn to give them some protection since Roe v. Wade was decided. People forget that the vast majority of states in America, including my home state of Illinois, which is dark blue now, they all had restrictions on abortion. Most states did not legalize abortion throughout the entire pregnancy. Most states actually banned abortion or limited it to cases of rape, incest, or life of the mother. So the political fight, getting the people involved and holding politicians accountable, it really does have an effect on public opinion streams.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's completely off the political agenda here. Completely off. I mean, I don't think I've ever heard a Scottish politician being questioned about abortion or debating with each other on the issue. And I think if, say, there was a referendum on it in Scotland, I think pro-choice would win, but it would end up as 60-40 something just because the arguments would be aired among people. But it's interesting what you're saying as well about the fact that politics and the law interacts with the culture, interacts with public opinion.
Absolutely.
I mean, in Scotland, a couple of years ago now, they introduced a spanking ban. That beforehand, public opinion was pretty overwhelmingly against it. 80%, 70% saying they thought, no, this is not necessary, it's not right. And yet, within a very short time afterwards, we really seem to have got into a culture where there are not many people who are willing to put their head above the parapet and say, no, I think actually smacking kids can be necessary, can be valuable, it shouldn't be banned. And the speed of change is unbelievable. It just shows me that so many people are so influenced by what's going on around them in society. They're not anchored to some principles themselves. They're going with the flow. That's part of our mission as a Scottish Family Party, to bring the pro-life issue into the mainstream of political debate, which is an uphill struggle, but that's part of the process of changing public opinion. But we look at the pro-life movement in America as a sort of shining example of how strong it can be and how it can come into the mainstream. So let's hope that there is progress with that coming up. I've got a few other issues. Another one I was fascinated to read about on your website. I might not have this terminology right, but a law being passed to prevent critical race theory being taught in schools. And it seemed to pass because one Democrat voted for it, which got it over the line. I mean, do you want to tell us about that? I was fascinated to read about that.
So that happened during what's known as Voter-Rama, which is it's a legislative day in America in the U.S. Senate, and they bring up hundreds of votes, and it's all kind of rapid fire. And Tom Cotton ended up introducing an amendment that would ban critical race theory from all federally funded entities. And if they did start teaching critical race theory, that they would lose their federal funding. It would basically enshrine, President Trump signed an executive order, and this amendment would enshrine that into law instead of just being an executive order. Now, the thing about critical race theory that's so dangerous is that it tells Americans that there are two classes. There are the oppressed and there are the oppressors. And the bigger the minority you are, the more oppressed you are. And it's really, really bad. And it's not even, basically, if you're a white male who's straight, you are the worst of the worst oppressors. And, if you're, a person of color who's gay and trans and, all the different types, like, you are the most oppressed. And so what we have to do is we have to change our legal system. We have to change society to upend that. And what the main thinkers and people behind critical race theory promote is the idea that we need racism today in order to stop racism in the future. So they're actually actively arguing for judging people and punishing them for the color of their skin. It's absolutely crazy. They're taking advantage of their sleuth wording, or their slick wording, their power in the mainstream media and their influence. It's absolutely crazy. They brand themselves as anti-racists, and they're the most racist people in the country. And Americans across the nation are standing up against it. I don't know if you've seen some of the videos that have been coming out from America at our local school board meetings, but parents have had enough. And it's not just white parents who are upset that their children are being called oppressors. It's Black parents who are upset about these teachers telling their kids that they're oppressed and that they can't overcome the system. There's their famous video of a doctor here who was an African-American guy who had children, and he was outraged that the school was teaching his children that they couldn't accomplish their dreams, that they couldn't accomplish their goals until they upended society. He asked them, he said, "I'm Black, I have a doctorate, I'm a medical doctor. How did I get that if this is a systematically oppressive country or systematically racist country?" Doesn't make any sense. And so America has internalized a very true fact, which is that the color of your skin does not determine the content of your character. And that is going to be very hard for these racists, as I would call them, to beat out of us. We don't want to judge people by the color of their skin. And it doesn't matter if they're Black, Asian, white, whatever it is. We don't like judging people by the color of their skin. We want to judge them by the content of their character, by their accomplishments, by what they do in their life, by the values that they set, whether or not they reject or embrace the American founding, the American experiment. That's what this country cares about, and the elites in this country are so out in left field and out of it that they're being rejected handily. And it's a very encouraging fight. It gives me a lot of hope in this country that we can do the right things.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating with the parallels in this country. The UK government, a UK government education minister, stood up in the House of Commons and said, if any schools are teaching critical race theory or white privilege or whatever, if they're teaching that as fact, then they're breaking the law, because that's politically contentious. You cannot do it. That was the Conservative spokeswoman for the Conservative Party. That's in England and Wales. In Scotland, the Scottish National Party, who unfortunately are in charge, their education policy is to teach critical race theory. They're absolutely open about it. They say, this is what it's founded on. This is what we teach them. And yet the Conservative Party in Scotland, which is sort of a branch of the same party that in England are saying it's illegal to teach critical race theory, in Scotland, they've got nothing to say about it. Mm-hmm. They just go with the flow and, I don't know, don't understand it, don't know what's going on, but they don't oppose it at all. So it's quite a remarkable situation. I mean, the things that we hear about going on in schools, I mean, it is just the indoctrinators are just having a field day, because there's no opposition to it in the Scottish Parliament. So it's just flying off in that direction. And we often hear from school children who, teenagers who get in touch and just say they're fed up to the back teeth of it, but they're frightened to go public and say so. They're frightened of the consequences for them at their school.
Yeah, because left-wing activists will destroy their life. They will, and look, I think it's tough for me because I've never been to the UK. I'm not that familiar with your legal and political system. I'm not enough to be dangerous, as my dad would say. But in America, we have the Bill of Rights, and we have a First Amendment right to oppose these things. But they're afraid to speak out about this from freedom of speech standpoint, even, like, because the activists in our culture will target them and their families, get them fired from their jobs. So it's almost like America has allowed the private sector to eliminate our First Amendment rights here. I mean, it's very interesting that you have the same things in the UK and in Scotland that keep people from speaking out about it. It's just the private sector does it here, and your government does it over there. It's absolutely crazy.
Yeah, basically in Scotland, everything does it. Everything does it. It's fascinating speaking to people. Almost everyone in Scotland has got some reason to keep their head down and not speak out what they believe, because it's their job, it's their spouse's job, it's their course, it's their organization they volunteer for, or whatever. There's just something where one way or another they're just afraid and they're worried what's going to happen. And of course, the worse that gets, the less people speak out with conservative views, and therefore the less people speak them, the more easy it is to demonize them when they do, because it sounds so outlandish to people because they never hear it, and you're in a vicious cycle there. Right, that was fascinating as well. Let's carry on with our list. We've got time for another couple. Another issue, it's one I've thought about a little bit before, but I was fascinated to see it coming up in America. And that's the idea of females and the draft. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, it's draft. Is that like American for conscription into the army?
That's exactly right.
Right. Okay.
But that's just what we call the draft here.
And that's something that's ready and waiting to be used if necessary. It's not a routine thing, is it?
No, that's correct. That's right.
Right. Okay. And so you've been arguing that women and girls shouldn't be subject to the draft in the way that men and boys are.
No, that's exactly right. And listen, I have a long family history of women serving in the military, but they did it by choice. I think that one thing is very clear, and that's that men are very good at killing and blowing up things, and we don't want to be doing that to women. It's not fair to the opposing armies. It's just a decorum thing. But at a bare minimum, right? So women are much more valuable to society when it comes to population and maintaining a stable population. And what I mean by that is, if you have a population, let's say, just for round numbers, we have a million women and only one man. You can repopulate that nation after it's had all of its men killed very quickly. It's going to be a very busy man for several days of the year, all day, but you can repopulate that country very quickly. Now, on the other hand, if you end up wiping out a bunch of your women who are, by the way, at their childbearing years, you're going to have a nightmare repopulating, because women can only have one baby at a time. And so if you wipe out half of your women, you can only repopulate at half the rate. So it's a common sense thing. It's a long-term societal stability thing. You don't want to wipe out all of your female population, or you really don't want to mess with your female population, because they're the life bringers into the world. I mean, think about how amazing that is. That we talk all the time. Like, everyone acts like men have such a great job or great duty in society. Women bring new life into the world. Like, I'm just amazed by this. Like, women create new human beings in their bodies. Like, these are human beings that will go on to change the world. They'll be someone's best friend. They'll be someone's spouse. They'll be someone's brother or sister. It's just absolutely crazy to me, like, the power that women have in the world to have babies. Like, it's just fascinating to me. And the idea that we're going to put these incredible machines that are infinitely valuable in war to be shot at or killed is absolutely insane to me. And like I said, my great-grandmother served at Freeman Field in Ohio with my great-grandfather. So how it worked in World War II is the men would get trained, and then before they got shipped off, they would come in and they would train the women that were going to replace them on the assembly lines. And my great-grandfather actually met my great-grandmother as the person that was replacing him. So he would always joke, you sent me off to war into the Pacific Theater. So, like, I'm not against women serving in our military. I'm just against putting them on the front lines or in combat roles, and especially against their own choice. If women want to sign up for this stuff, fine, but you're not conscripting my daughters. You're not conscripting my wife. Like, lay off.
Yeah, well, I think maybe I'm a slightly different angle on it. Is that I feel that there's something just built in to men, some sort of responsibility, that in a situation like war, it's the responsibility of the men to go and do the fighting in order to protect women and children from having to be involved in that. I feel that's built in. Now, obviously, any feminist worth her salt will be saying that's just appalling sexism there. To which I'm happy to admit that, but it's surely sexism in a favorable direction. If you're seeking to protect someone from something that's very unpleasant and dangerous, and you're seeking to put yourself or your own sex in that more dangerous position, I just think it's built in. Now, what you presented there were some logical arguments for where that's come from, which I think are absolutely valid. But I think it's just an intuitive thing that's built into to most men. They realize that. So I think that certainly applies when we think about our own female relatives, applies to women in general. How about the situation in combat, though? If you imagine that you're a soldier and you've got your rifle, who's in your sights, and you see it's a woman, I mean, I would imagine a lot of men would just pause in a way that they might not do if it was a man, because of this built-in, this sort of built-in, I don't know what you call it, respect, duty to protect or whatever women. I think there would be a little bit of reluctance to fire on a woman. Now,
well, Richard, what can I just tell you? I disagree with that, and here's why. Because when you go to war, right, you don't want women in your ranks, because you really think that the Chinese soldiers are going to hesitate to shoot a woman? No, these are moralless people. They don't have any morals. Do you think the Nazis would have hesitated for 1 second to kill a woman or even a child? No, they did that. When you're up against evil forces, they don't hesitate. They don't have the morals that we do, and they don't have the natural inclination to do the right thing like we do. The Chinese, the North Koreans, any of our adversaries, these guys are not going to hesitate to shoot one of our women or strap an IED to them and blow them up. Look at the Middle East, right? They literally hook bombs up to their women and children and have them blow themselves up to kill our soldiers. They don't value their women and children, and we're better than that, right? Like, that is what separates the Americans from the Taliban and from Al Qaeda, is we don't strap bombs on our children, we don't put them in danger, we don't do this to women. This is barbaric. It's barbaric, and there's no other word to describe it besides that. And so it's just, I get what you're saying, but like, our enemies are evil, and they're not going to hesitate to shoot our women. But on the other end, we're good guys. And so if the Chinese start putting women in their military, which they aren't, by the way, no other industrialized nation that's actually a competitor to us is actually putting women in the front lines, because they're smart, and they're not just like woke, and they don't view look, the military has a very simple purpose. They go in, they blow up things, and they kill the bad guys. That's it. It's not meant for social engineering. It's not meant to usher in a new era of civil rights. That's not what the military is for. It's for blowing up and killing the bad guys. Yeah.
I would say within armies, whichever side they're on, there will be a spectrum of moral quality among the soldiers. I do believe, as you agreed, that for some soldiers there would be that reluctance. I mean, in terms of the countries that don't allow women, I mean, back in the 60s and 70s, 50s even, when women were not allowed to go into certain professions, the argument was, people would say, oh, well, women can't, say, be an airline pilot because they haven't got the qualities you need to be an airline pilot. And the argument against that was, well, if that's true, you don't need to say women can't be airline pilots. All you need to do is to have proper tests for the qualities you need to be an airline pilot, and you'll find no women will pass them. So that's fine. You don't need a rule saying no women. Just test what you need, and that will do the job for you. And they found when they did test what you need, they found that women actually could be airline pilots. And that's the general big picture through society. They find that women were capable of doing these jobs. But when they came for the armed forces, they had requirements in terms of physical strength, but women couldn't reach them. Virtually no women, if not no women at all, could reach them. So what do they do? So they have different standards for women. So to get into the British Army, I looked at it quite recently, a man has to be able to do 44 press-ups in 2 minutes. A woman has to be able to do 21. Now, I think that either you don't need to be that strong. You don't need to be able to do 44 press-ups. That's not actually necessary. But if it's not necessary, why do you need men to do it? If it is necessary, then why are you letting women in when they can't do it? So I think with combat roles, I think the other countries, it's not particularly that they're excluding women. It's just that they haven't introduced a double standard to allow women into those particular roles that do actually require that degree of strength. But,
no, I think that's exactly right. It's always a double standard. They want equality, but they don't want equal standards. And just I just want to point out something else. In America, there's this feminist debate about women making less money than men and men having everything in society. But there have been a lot of really smart people that point out that the vast majority of people in prison are men. The vast majority of people that end up committing suicide are men. There are a lot of bad things that go along with being a man, and men are much, 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 much more likely to die on the job because they choose more dangerous jobs that pay more as the reward for taking the bigger risk. Women end up choosing jobs that pay less but are more rewarding, like being a teacher. Although being a teacher in America is actually very lucrative now, so I can't use that as an example because they get amazing pensions and they actually get paid very, very well for working 9 months out of the year. But women make different choices than men do because they're different. So what we need to do in America is, look, if you're a woman and you want to join the military, you want to serve in a combat role, fine, let's do it, try it. But you have to meet the same standards that everyone else has to meet. And we're not making special exceptions for you. It's that simple. Women can make their own minds up. They can make their own choices. But I when it comes to removing those choices and conscripting women by force, it's totally crazy to me.
Yeah. Let me just tell you a horror story from Scotland. You'll enjoy this. Glasgow, the biggest city in Scotland. Some women there who'd worked for the council for decades sued the council for an equal pay claim. They claimed that they suffered from gender-based pay discrimination. And the reason is that when they applied for jobs, they looked at all the jobs that you could have with the council. You could be a cleaner. You could be a dinner lady in a school. You could be a grave digger. You could be, a refuse collector. And these women looked at all those jobs. They could have applied for any of them, but they chose the less manual, the indoor, slightly cozier jobs. And they did them for decades. They could have applied for the other ones, but they didn't. They did them for decades. And then some smart lawyer comes along and says, right, all you thousands of women, you've been discriminated against because being a cleaner is actually the same standard of job as being a grave digger. So therefore, you've been discriminated against in your pay for decades. And so they made a payout that was over £500 million, which was more than a third of the council's annual budget. I think it was about the same as their education budget for a whole year for the whole city. And now the council's finances are in a total mess. It's absolutely disastrous. But during that process, not a single elected politician in Scotland said, whoa, what's going on here? This is just crazy. So and it's happening to companies as well. So
what's insane about that, Richard, what's insane about that is that if a politician had spoken up and used affable messaging around it and just pointed out the insanity of equating, cleaners with grave diggers or rubbish collectors, the voters would have responded in kind. They would have rewarded it. I mean, the American people, I think the broader world, Europe, they're hungry for the truth. They're being lied to nonstop every single day. In America, our mainstream media, with the exception of Fox News, but Fox News isn't that great, on every occasion. The mainstream media it tells the American people all the time, men can have babies. A new man just had a baby today. Like, people know this is nuts. They know it's a lie. They know it's a propaganda campaign. They know it's indoctrination. And these politicians are really missing out on the huge benefits of speaking truth to power and building these coalitions. Like, there's a huge opening for someone that's going to come speak the truth. And what I'm really worried about is that the person that's coming up that's willing to stand up to these, these Nazis, basically, is what they equate to. That type of person is, it might not be a very good guy, So it's just, we need to start standing up now before it gets worse.
That could open up a whole new conversation, couldn't it?
Yeah, no, I'm sorry.
No, time is up. Let's just have a quick look at a couple of comments, Ellen. I'm glad women and children are called to evacuate first in an emergency. That's a fascinating one. I assume there are feminists who say they think this is discrimination and this tradition should be dispensed with. Is that right? Have you heard people talk about that?
Yeah, no, look, there are radical feminists here and abroad who would argue that, prioritizing women and children first when it comes to safety is discrimination. But you know what? We can't let stupid or evil people keep us from protecting our women and children. So listen, if you want to get to the back of the line, if you want to hang out, in dangerous situations and not be protected, by all means, oh, sorry, my light just went off. By all means, do it. But at the same time, let us protect our women and children and get out of the way. Like, you can't stop a father from protecting his wife and children. It's just not the thing. I'm just going to turn my light on real quick.
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
Right, well, our time is up. That's been a fascinating discussion. You must come back on if you can find the time again in a few months. We'd love to speak to you again. If there's any way we can help you, or if there's anything we need from you, I say we'll be in touch. But we really appreciate you coming on, and that was fascinating. So thanks very much, Terry.
Thank you, Richard. Anytime.
I just mentioned very quickly, those of you who might have just tuned in later on, we've got a protest at the Scottish Parliament, 11:30 on Thursday. See our social media. We've got a meeting in Edinburgh Thursday night. We've got a meeting in Glasgow tomorrow night. We've got a meeting near to Peterhead on Friday night. We've got a meeting in Ayr on Wednesday. See our social media. It would be great to see you at any of these events. And thanks for watching. Thanks again to Terry. And good night.